Hello, I'm Jonathan Friedman, Admissions Director and Associate Professor at the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. An important aspect of IISHJ is providing adult learning opportunities and resources, along with our professional training programs and publications. It's my pleasure to be joined today by Valerie Estelle Frankel. Valerie is an amazingly prolific author and editor of over 100 books on pop culture, science fiction, and fantasy, including Jews in popular science fiction, Jewish science fiction and fantasy through 1945, Jewish science fiction and fantasy of the 1960s and 70s, and encountering Jewish science fiction for kids and teens. Valerie, it's great to talk to you.
Thanks. Cool to be here.
So, writer's block is a pretty common phenomenon, but it doesn't seem to affect you at all. What keeps you writing at the rapid pace that you do?
Diet Coke. And if we're checking, it's kosher. Um, Seriously, nonfiction is easier. And I think of what I do as like giant high school essays, here's my thesis, here's what my examples are going to be. I have a little research to do. Let me just pile it in there. And as you said, I don't do writer's block. I put in hours every day, even if I don't particularly want to.
Do you work on multiple projects at the same time?
I'd rather not, but it certainly happens. Like right now, I am working hard on Jewish science fiction of the 80s and 90s, but I shoved that aside because I'd like to write two books on Wicked before the movie comes out. Tick, 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 tick. And then I shoved that aside because it's the first day of work, school, and my students are expecting all kinds of materials. So at sub level, I'm working on all three at once, including today. Yay.
Well, we won't keep you too long. You can get back to that. But much of your research deals with Jewish contributions to science fiction and fantasy. Why have Jews been so heavily involved in these genres over the years?
Science fiction versus fantasy might have two different answers to that question, to say nothing of various other subgenres. Science fiction, if we define it as real science, real plausible, possible near future science, as opposed to Journey to the Center of the Earth or the Time Machine or something, really was started by Jews in New York in 1926 when Hugo Gernsback, a Jewish Belgian immigrant, founded Amazing Stories, the first science fiction magazine. Why did he do this? Well, he was an inventor and he was excited about the science and wanted to get young readers into the science. And in his own short story, he was busy not only including a blueprint for working lasers, which weren't quite invented yet, but also predicting everything from this Zoom call to sandwich dispensers to, all right, a couple things like telepathic phone calls that didn't work out, but an awful lot of the inventions we have today. And this was in an era when, if you were Jewish, you couldn't get hired in New York to do much more than sew clothes. But of course, as a Jew, he was comfortable hiring Jews. So many of his writers, his first editors, the spin-off magazines, and then the publishers and the conventions, and all of what we call science fiction today, the clubs, the fanzines, spun off, and away it went. I might also add more generally that Judaism tends to be pro science. Judaism tends to be cool with, yeah, the Bible, but the Bible has room for the dinosaurs. The Bible has room for this. The Bible commands us to heal the sick, including using modern technology. So Jews are interested in what the possibilities are, and then we get to sit around and argue about when Shabbat starts on the moon. And how do you transport the Passover supplies to a foreign planet? And would this alien animal be close enough? And then we're just sitting around the convention over in the corner arguing for funsies.
Yeah, and I think in terms of fantasy as well, there's plenty of that in the Bible and Talmudic
Mm.
literature, Midrashim, etc. It seems like there's a playfulness also built into our heritage, as it pertains to things like the burning bush and other elements that are so far out there anyway. It's maybe inspiration for these stories.
Absolutely. Every culture has fantasy elements mixed into its ancient folklore and mythology and epic texts and religion like we do. So, yeah, you can't really find a culture that's never had any fantasy in it. Now, I've heard arguments about fantasy is all Tolkien imitation, which is, again, you can make a case for that given how fantasy evolved in, say, the US. Um, and I've also heard arguments that Tolkien's fantasy seems very Christian and pagan and chosen one. And sometimes I see Jewish fantasy very much rebelling against it. There was a huge wave in the 60s, and some of it was still going in the 80s, where when there's a Jewish character off to a fantasy world, they're the jester, the clown. The whole joke is, you know, um, this balding 50-year-old is saving the world, but we should be kind of smirking about that because they don't look like a traditional hero. And, maybe they've got all kinds of are groping for their medications in their pockets and all the cliches. And Jewish authors were writing these, saying that this is how they wanted to subvert or react to. However, nowadays, I'm really seeing people reclaim it. There was an article in 2010, Why Is There No Jewish Narnia? Which, of course, got tons of pushback as everybody posted in response, I know one, go read this book, that book, where have you been? But nowadays, I see a lot of Jews actually creating very strong Jewish fantasy worlds, possibly as a reaction to, we haven't done this yet? Well, let's do this. In fact, this morning I read The Writer by Josh Gad, a graphic novel that's absolutely just launching in.
Yeah, I heard about that as well. So what constitutes Jewish science fiction and fantasy? Does there actually have to be Jewish themes and ideas and content, or is it more than that?
Well, as somebody researching this, one aspect that was driving me nuts is there's a whole category of Adam and Eve science fiction and a whole category of Noah's Ark science fiction. These were popular in the 40s, possibly because these concepts are not copyrighted. So people could riff off these and they're familiar. But then one has to ask the question, yes, is this Jewish or is this really Christian Adam and Eve or Noah's Ark? And sometimes there are telltales, and sometimes there really aren't. So, aside from the bit where you're just literally retelling a Bible story and it's really, really obvious, and I have seen some. So, this robot was given a mission of go to Tau Ceti 4 and give them the holy book that I will show you and be their rabbi. Well, okay, off we go. So, themes. Sometimes, yes. Although, again, if it's, you know, healing the world and environmentalism, that's a Jewish theme, but that's also a very widespread theme. So it's hard to pin that down as that's only a Jewish value. Sometimes we get holidays. Sometimes we get Jewish characters. Sometimes we get characters living according to Jewish practice, which could be a very, very wide definition of things. Sometimes these stories are written by non-Jews. Sometimes they're written by non-Jews who clearly really super did their homework and studied everything and tried to write an authentic story and pulled it off. Um, the Lady Astronaut series that won the Hugo a few years ago was very notable for non-Jewish author, Jewish main character, but yeah, people could feel that she'd really done her work. So several different things could qualify it as Jewish science fiction. I was on a panel where we tried to define this, and of course, we had 12 different definitions because that's what We do when we're asked these questions. One person was pointing out that if you just have somebody walking around going, I'm Jewish, or during the one Christmas special in 7 years of episodes, they're off in the corner with a menorah, that isn't very Jewish. That isn't teaching us a lot about who we are and what the religion is. That's representation, but that's pretty tiny. On the other hand, when I was asked how much Jewish content I thought needed to be in there, I said, depending on what it is, maybe zero. And my example for that is Where the Wild Things Are, which has zero Jews, no menorah in the corner, nothing at all. However, you can feel the author's rage, frustration, desire to act out the Yiddish concept of a wild child. And when you look at his childhood, when on his bar mitzvah it was revealed to him that his grandfather had died in the Holocaust, and just again, this frustration growing up in America, you can kind of sense it, to say nothing of the slobbery, hairy Jewish relatives bending over when he was a little kid and going, oh, you're so cute. Look at that little face. We just want to eat you up. So sometimes you can just sense it, even when they don't deliberately put it in.
That's one of the things I appreciated about the great author Peter David, who just recently died. He would throw in some Yiddish words. He would definitely have subtext and inside jokes that people like you and me would pick up. But writing for a wide audience in his science fiction novels, like Star Trek novels and so forth. And it was for everyone. But if you saw it from a particular perspective, it was also very Jewish.
Yeah, my friends were passing around Peter David novels and snickering. The aliens are named after stuff on the Seder plate. And if you don't know, they're just alien names. Sure, fine, you keep reading. And if you do know, you just burst into laughter and grab the book and show it to your closest friend. By the way, on Peter David, yes, the Star Trek novels. People often don't know about his run on Supergirl, where Supergirl is having conversations with God, sacrificing herself to save the world, and then becoming an angel. We get this really interesting spiritual arc, even though it's just like Supergirl 182, and she is not the most famous character out there, but I found that well worth a read.
Yeah, he will be missed for sure. So, what are some examples of how Jewish ideas, themes, and elements have maybe permeated popular science fiction and fantasy, maybe hiding in plain sight, things that we could find ourselves if we're curious?
Hmm. Well, all right. This one's a little subtle, but we've certainly heard of the show. Um, a Jewish producer, well, two Jewish producers sat down and hammered out this concept about a really pacifist hero who wants to make the world, the whole universe, a better place, but he's never going to fight. He's never going to pick up a gun. He's wisecracking his way out of situations. He's undercutting authority. He is humorous. He is fun. He is supportive. And he is the Doctor from Doctor Who. So, as far as a Jewish ideology that really, really defied multiple generations of science fiction, I've got to throw Doctor Who out there. Uh, Star Trek has had a lot of Jews in charge, but of course, Roddenberry was an atheist humanist, and therefore Kirk spends all his time debunking false gods on every single planet he visits. Uh,
Which is pretty Jewish too, I think.
yes. So, combination of all the above, and of course, the number of producers on later Star Trek, writers on 60s Star Trek, Roddenberry's two co-producers on Star Trek. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on of, yes, Jews involved in the project, to say nothing of the actors, to say nothing of Spock's, not just Spock's gesture, but the fact that when Spock Leonard Nimoy directed Star Trek 3, he decided it should look like Israel, down to the priestly robes and so on. Vulcan should look like, yeah. Um, Trying to think because yes, there are other big franchises that are that deep. I'm not a huge Foundation fan, and everybody says the TV show has very little in common, and I would agree. But Asimov, again, was picturing these people of the book at the end of the universe just quietly hiding all the knowledge and keeping all the knowledge for the time it would be needed as the empires are rising and falling and thrashing it out. And then when you go to the boonies in the novels, people have Yiddish accents because that's how Asimov pictured them. And yes, he has said I kind of pictured everybody in Foundation was kind of Jewish on some level. So, as with where the wild things are, even if they don't say, the Doctor has obviously never come out as having a religion, and if he did, it would be more Gallifreyan than Jewish. But you get this sensibility, you get this imagery other than knights on horseback riding to the Crusades and being the chosen one, because we're telling a different story here. And sometimes we really get it. Mel Brooks, Spaceballs. Many people say that he did make the movie Jews in Space, and that's what it ended up looking like.
So, is there maybe one or two places for our audience to start if they wanted to start investigating Jews in science fiction and fantasy?
Well, uh, possibly the place you don't want to start is Google Stephen Silver and Jewish science fiction, because that's the list of, thousands of these. The classic anthologies, Wandering Stars and More Wandering Stars from the 70s, were the first collections of Jewish science fiction with one of the short stories by lots of different authors. And those, they're still available. They still keep popping up. But we've got a lot of new cool anthologies coming out. Um, Jewish Futures. I got the story The Aliens of Helm in that one, where they live in their silly Polish village, sort of. Uh, Jewish Futures 2 is being set up as we speak. Zion's Fiction. If you say that fast, you understand why that's a pun on fiction from Israel that is, in fact, science fiction. And uh, the sequel to that one came out too. Um, Recently, there was a collection of just Jewish alt history, and I was really struck by the Jewish Book of Horror, because Jews writing horror and Jewish horror really has been a taboo for so long, mostly because just after the Holocaust, we were not in the mood. But recently, we've started to get back into it, movies too, and they came up with some very interesting answers, especially the Passover story that ended with, and let all who are hungry come and eat. Ugh. So I guess my answer is the current anthologies that are coming out with one story by everybody are delightful and fun, come up with quick, short answers. And if you love that author or that author, man, do they have other books out there you could read.
Well, thank you so much, Valerie, for joining me.
Thank you. This was fun.
And to our audience, thanks for watching.